I'm dead? I asked, the strange, beautiful man. I rushed my hands to my throat. My mind was racing as the memories of what happened replayed. Laughter sang out and echoed through the empty graveyard. My mind flashed back to a few moments ago. I remember running desperately through my village. My knuckles were white from how tightly I gripped an old, rusted farming sickle. I had a horrible ache in my stomach as the sight of the freshly built church came into view. I burst into the graveyard, quickly spotting the priest. He was standing over Fenrir. He was a wolf and my best friend. The priest slit his throat. A loud blood-curdling howl cried out. The sound made me lose my footing. I heard screams, and then, there was nothing. For an exceedingly long time, I slept. I do not remember dreaming, or any form of consciousness. It felt like, for a time, I didn't even exist. There was simply nothing, until there was something. A laugh. A boisterous enchanting laugh. I am coming, Fenrir. Oh no. Am I too late? You tripped and pierced your own throat with that rusted sickle. The beautiful man slapped his knee and laughed harder. The sound of the voice was inviting, and it pulled my focus towards his face. His skin was paler than the moon and his eyes were a deep crimson red. He had a mysterious toothy smile. He had a chunk of a human skull over his left eye. He was very slender and tall. He had straight wispy black hair that fell to his shoulders. He had a funny foreign accent. He wore a black suit, like ones I've seen the more important priests wear. A tall hat sat upon his head. He was mesmerizing. Tyrell Larson, age 15. Fenrir, Larson, age 5. First death of coordinates. The man trailed off. He began pacing back and forth in the snow. He seemed light-footed. A loud bark interrupted my thoughts, and I quickly scanned the area. Fenrir had been sitting next to a cut square stone. I found my courage at the sight of my old friend and spoke out. Who are you? What do you mean? Where are we? I asked. My voice was shaky. I was afraid that I already knew all the answers. The man stopped pacing and slammed his book shut. He flicked his wrist and the black feathered quill he was using vanished. He turned slowly with his head cocked to one side. His red eye burned through the chunk of skull. The heat of his gaze made me uneasy. The man stepped forward and threw his hands up in the air in a grand, flamboyant gesture. Me? I am Death. He grinned. Death folded his lanky hand across his chest and bowed. I was surprised his tall hat did not fall from his head. Death sauntered towards Fenrir. His hips swung hypnotically. He got to the wolf's side and rested his hand on its head. Death began to scratch the fur onto Fenrir's head. Where are we? I asked. Death knelt and wrapped his arms around his knees. He leaned over and whispered something in Fenrir's ear. The entire time he gave me a weird, judgmental look. Fenrir barked and Death nodded his head slowly. Death shot up and did a bunch of backflips before landing and thrusting his hands into the air. Tyrell Larson, you are in purgatory. Technically you should not be awake right now, but I just had to meet you. I am a ... big fan. He smiled and began to chuckle into his hand. What do you mean we are in purgatory? I asked. I looked around frantically and recognized the graveyard. The church was the same. I was pretty sure that I was still in my village. Death burst into laughter and placed his hands on his belly. Best to think of purgatory as the other side of a mirror, a reflection of the living world. He laughed. I clapped my hands and knelt forward. Fenrir came running at top speed. I embraced him tightly and he licked my face. Death made a sound of admiration and interrupted our reunion. All right, Tyrell, I must get back to work. I have to put you back to sleep now. He shrugged his shoulders and then began to stretch. Put me back to sleep? What does that mean? I asked. I stopped petting Fenrir and stood up. I looked Death up and down. I was sizing him up. He was not very intimidating, for being the Grim Reaper. Death sighed and put his hand into a pouch in his pants. He pulled out a thin slate of obsidian and held it up to his ear. Hey, can you cover me? He asked. A moment of silence and he spoke again. Yeah, he's calmer than expected, like you said he would be. Death sighed and mumbled into the chunk of obsidian. I looked down at Fenrir in confusion. Okay, goodbye, Death said. He placed the obsidian back into the pouch. His flamboyant demeanor faded and he rubbed his fingers against the bridge of his nose. Look T, can I call you T? He barely asked before he continued. His voice faded out as he mumbled something to himself. I usually try to keep this short. Death waved his hand, and a plume of black smoke revealed an extravagant hand-carved chair. The wood was stained the darkest shade of black I had ever seen. He sat down in the chair with an audible thump, and continued talking to me. You tripped and pierced yourself while convinced you were some sort of hero. That kind of death is exactly the type of thing that gets me going. I laughed so hard that I just need to wake you up and shake your hand. However, times are up. I need to put you back to sleep until Judgment Day, Death said. He waved his hand in a circle as if he were bored with speaking to me and wanted to rush things along. What about Fenrir? I asked. Death dropped his hand and looked at me eyes wide for a moment. I tell you all of this and you're worried about a wolf? Death asked puzzlingly. He is my best friend. Is he going to be okay after the trauma of having his throat slit? That betrayal? I was genuinely worried about my friend. I ran my hands through his soft fur and a deep longing gripped my chest. I did not want to lose him again. Death got up and the chair vanished in another plume of black smoke. He walked towards me, and that devilish toothy grin appeared back on his face. He clapped his hands gently as he walked. His voice had new life and his personality returned to that flamboyant attitude-free sway. Fenrir technically died before you. Last brain signal tends to be a little longer in humans than in dogs. The fine print will get you every time. But because of this misfortune, Fenrir is these lands' fine church grim. What's a church grim? I asked. I was on guard. He was moving slowly in a circle around us, but he was slowly getting closer. I felt uneasy again. Something inside of me knew I could not let him touch me. Death's smile grew and he cracked his neck. He pulled his arm across his chest and stretched. Because of incredibly old and very dark magics, a Grimm is a soul that is bound to a land and cursed to protect it, for who knows how long. Death shrugged and laughed again. Literally, no idea when this shift ends. Protect? I barely got the word out before Death interrupted. Demons, the fallen angels, roam purgatory. They hunt souls, yada yada. Look kid, I am really running out of time here. It's bedtime. I had not noticed how close he had gotten. He was right in front of me and his hand was inches from my face. I panicked and shouted out, Myko. I yelled. I jumped backwards and shoved Death away with all my strength. Fenrir attacked and bit Death on the wrist. My oh my, this is interesting. Death smiled and laughed. This time it was eerie and sounded murderous. His eyes were wide, and his head was tilted to the side. Come to me, Leviathan, he spoke. The sky grew dark, and clouds formed in the sky. Lightning flashed and thunder crashed. A meteor came rocketing down and crashed into the ground. The force sent me flying tens of feet backwards into a tree. I saw Fenrir get launched in the opposite direction. A large crater had formed where we were just standing, and Death was floating in the air above it. He raised his right hand in front of him and a large obsidian scythe rose from the depths of the flaming pit. Dying hurts worse the second time. Death shrieked a laugh like a banshee. He was terrifying now. Death flexed his back and 8 beautiful large black wings emerged from his back. He rose higher into the air and his wings blocked out the moon. I was mesmerized. I saw Fenrir get up and shake it off from the other side of the pit. I turned my attention back to Death and focused on the beautiful black blade of his weapon. It shined beautifully yet tragically. In the reflection danced thousands of tormented faces. They took turns coming in and out of focus and they were pushed by an invisible current. Behind the transparent faces I could vaguely make out a faint serpent. It was weaving and swimming with all the faces in the invisible current. The scythe's blade was 3 feet long and had a width of 7 inches at the thickest part. The handle of the weapon was an ancient wood, cracked and worn from an unfathomable age. Silver vines crept up the brown wood of the handle and merged with the obsidian blade. Amethyst gems shone like grapes from the vines. Foolish boy, Death spoke. Before the words had even reached my ears, I was flying backwards at an alarming speed. I felt my back crash into a spruce tree. The branches caught me and felt comforting from the force. My forehead was burning. I rushed my hands to the spot and rubbed intensely. The sound of Death's words finally reached my ears. The wind was knocked out of me, and I felt as if I was going to get wet myself. I flicked you from here and the force of the air sent you flying. I heard Death say. He was laughing again. I looked up and Death was in front of me again, his hand held out to help me up. A black leather glove was now covering his porcelain skin. I grabbed and pulled myself up. I brushed myself off. I heard Fenrir bark and saw him running around the pit to come meet us. I looked around and I couldn't see the obsidian scythe anywhere. Death's wings were also nowhere to be found. Sorry about that. You two were the first mortals to attempt attacking me. I reacted a bit aggressively. Death removed his top hat and bowed again. His dark hair covered his face. Fenrir had rejoined us and jumped up and down excited. He was unharmed. Death gathered himself and called Fenrir over to be scratched. As I was saying, this good boy has to stay here in purgatory with me. He sounded sad at the words. No need to worry, T. As deeply as you care for Fenrir, I care for all my animal grim friends. He said reassuringly. He sat down and played with Fenrir. Everything had been happening so fast I did not have time to think about it. I remember the rumors around my village warning about the priests. The whispers said that they were looking for a great beast to sacrifice and bury in the graveyard. Some rituals regarding protection and safety. I never would have thought that the rumors would directly impact me and Fenrir. I realized the meaning behind Death's words. I wouldn't want Fenrir to be stuck alone in purgatory for who knows how long. Death, sir, I steadied myself and spoke confidently. Please let me swap places with Fenrir and serve as Grim instead. Death stood up and the smile spread across his face again. He laughed and clapped his hands. That annoying brat. She is always right. His grin widened. Death walked towards me, removed the black leather glove, and presented his hand to me. I was hesitant and recoiled at the thought of shaking Death's hand. Do not worry, unless I intend to harm you. My touch is harmless. Death smiled warmly. I grasped his hand, and he pulled me into a tight embrace. He towered over me and must have had to fold his body to hug me. Since you made me laugh so hard because of your pointless death, and for your bravery in attacking me. And because my sister said so. She is so annoying. Not as annoying as my brothers though. Actually, I hate my entire family. I should try therapy. Death trailed off and began pacing around again. Excuse me. I spoke. Fenrir barked and joined me in getting his attention. Oh sorry. Death laughed and continued his speech. I will let you stay awake and assist Fenrir in protecting these lands. Be warned though, you are not the Grim and your soul is very vulnerable. If you get devoured by a demon and remain inside of a demon, come Judgment Day, well, that is game over baby. Death snapped his fingers. I did not even have to think about my decision. I shouted louder than I meant to, and it echoed throughout the area. I accept. Please let me stay with Fenrir. I yelled. Fenrir howled into the air and joined my cries. Death laughed again and shook his head from side to side. You really are something else, kid. I don't be back in these parts for some time now, but I hope you are still here when I come visit next. Death said. He began to stretch again. A crow's cry rang out and sent a chill down my spine. Who is a good boy? See you soon, friend. Death reached down and pet Fenrir one last time. Good luck, kid. Death grinned and looked at me once more. His crimson red eye seemed compassionate as it peered through the chunk of skull. Before I could say anything else, I blinked, and death was gone. I sighed and walked over to join Fenrir. I continued past him back towards the village and made my way towards home. If what death said was true, purgatory was a reflection. My home should be just as I left it, I thought as we walked. I tried to make sense of everything death had said. We made our way through our village, and I rubbed my hand over my neck. I couldn't feel anything from where the sickle had pierced me. I realized I wasn't in much pain from crashing into that tree. I had so much to think about, but all I wanted to do was crawl into bed and cry myself to sleep. Fenrir and I made it to our hut and everything were just as I expected. Normal looking. It was strange. I'm exhausted, buddy. Let's try to figure some more of this out tomorrow. I yawned and stretched. Fenrir barked and laid on the floor next to my bed. I stared up at the ceiling and let my mind wander. Death was so cool, I thought, as I fell asleep.